All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Claire Reedy, and I'm the Program Manager at the Health Federation of Philadelphia for the Mobilizing Action for Resilient Communities, or MARC initiative. I'm joined in the room by my colleagues Leslie Lieberman and Carolyn Smith-Brown, and we're delighted to have you all with us today for the MARC Brown Bag webinar series. Before we get started, I have a couple of notes to share. This session is being recorded and will be archived on the MARC website. At the moment, all participants are muted, so please use the questions pane on your GoToWebinar control panel to share your comments or questions. Mobilizing Action for Resilient Communities is a learning collaborative of 14 cross-sector networks that are using the science of adverse childhood experiences to build the movement for a just, healthy, and resilient world. MARC is coordinated by the Health Federation of Philadelphia with support from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and the California Endowment. You can read more about the communities participating in MARC on our website. We also post monthly to our shared learning series, in which you can read about key themes emerging across sites and get related resources. MARC has an impressive National Advisory Committee, and I'm sure many of you recognize some of the names and faces here. We're very thankful that they have graciously agreed to take on this webinar series. You can visit the MARC Brown Bag webpage to see the webinar lineup, access our archives, and register for upcoming sessions, including the September 7th session with our advisor, Dr. Melissa Merrick, who's a behavioral scientist at CDC's National Center for Injury Prevention and Control and the lead scientist on the ACE study. She'll be sharing their technical package on preventing child abuse and neglect. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Mark Dessauer. Mark is Vice President of Learning at SPITFIRE Strategies, a firm that works with clients to bring their big ideas to life with smart communications, winning campaigns, and learning opportunities. In this role, he creates learning and capacity building tools and trainings for organizations and provides strategic communications for his clients. Mark has a long history of communications experience prior to joining SPITFIRE Strategies, including as Director of Communications for the Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina Foundation, as Communication Director for Active Living by Design, and also as a telecommunications analyst with top secret clearance for the U.S. Embassy in Switzerland. He's also deeply involved in his home community of Durham, North Carolina, where he co-founded Bull City Open Streets, North Carolina's first open streets event, and helped establish and develop the Durham Public Schools Hub Farm, a 30-acre farm and wilderness area where students, teachers, and the community grow and harvest healthy food, hike, bike, and explore nature and the food system. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm going to turn the webinar over to you now.
Thank you, Claire. I really appreciate being a part of this. I'm honored to be let me show your screen here. I'm honored to be a part of the MARC Advisory Board and getting to know the 14 communities out there. Title of this presentation, Mindful Messaging, Strategic Communications for the ACE and Resilience Movement. That could be a 4-hour plus webinar. And I am going to rush through this at just a nice clip, not rushing it too much, but giving you an overview of SPITFIRE's mindful messaging. Well, actually, let me tell you a little bit more. Let me move this forward so you can see what we're doing next. Here we go. Very simply here, I work for SPITFIRE Strategies. I am honored to be a part of SPITFIRE as well, because SPITFIRE really trained me back almost 15 years ago when I was communications director for Active Living by Design, working on childhood obesity. And their tools and their staff really changed the way that I saw communications. SPITFIRE only works with nonprofits and foundations across the country, and giving good ideas life is one part of just developing tools and helping make the world better through smarter strategic communications. That's what I hope to do here. That's a slightly smiling photo of me in the center. And the thing that has drawn me to ACEs and MARC and this work has been sort of the evolution of my understanding public health and what it takes to change a community. I worked 10 years on childhood obesity across the country for Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And through my work in over 75 communities, but also on the ground here in Durham, I've understood that communications is central, and communications that put the audience, meaning the community, at the center, is what it takes. And Spitfire has the tools to really listen and shape better, smarter communications for you. And so in this training, what I hope, we're going to go over mindful messaging. We're going to talk a little bit about the activation point, and those are what are the prods, the tools, the understanding that you need to help move your audience to action, and then give some messaging examples that I was able to learn, understand, and work with Wendy Ellis and building community resilience on that project last year. The fantastic work that they're doing, and want to highlight one of the tools that they have. So that's what we'll do here. I will take the time to be open for questions throughout. One thing, I have a photo here of a typical coalition meeting where many of you might be sitting at, part of larger coalitions. And as you go across the table around the meeting, the thoughts that could come out, understanding what kind of language are you using there in the coalition. When you talk about assessments, that public health or city planning that's there. Some people might be wondering, wait, I was nominated to come here for my organization. Why am I representing it here? Not quite sure. Others might be asking, are we talking toxic stress or ACEs, a pair of ACEs? And some folks might, who are working with a client population, try to understand, why would parents want to be a part of this? Coalition communications, as many of you are working across that, is at the center of the work that you're doing. And that's something which I think having that and understanding a common framework to talk will really help you engage your coalition, engage not just the internal audiences you need to succeed, but also the external ones as well. I've seen this and these questions come up time and time again when working on childhood obesity or working on adverse childhood experiences or just working on trying to get bike lanes here in Durham. When you bring a lot of groups to the table, having clear messaging and having an understanding of who's there at the table helps build stronger communications. So before we dive into this, I just wanted to just check in with you, the overall goals of your work. What are the short-term goals? Is it building a larger coalition? Are you trying to get monetary support? Are you training partners there, signing up parents? Or the larger goal is systems change that you have? Being aware of those and applying these messaging to it helps you accomplish more. That was the light bulb moment for me, is really understanding that communications is not a separate plan, but it's really woven into your strategic plan, into your goals. Because the things that you want to accomplish require smart strategic communications to get it accomplished. So we've got an issue right now with communications. I sort of liken this to our water. We drink water. Everybody across the planet needs fresh, clean water. Getting water from a pure source refreshes the body, keeps you healthy. If you have a lot of impurities in there, if you're not sure what the well tapped into, if there's a lot of agricultural runoff, anything else is going to make your system sick, upset. We can talk about water, but we can say the same thing about your attention span. And understanding that what we're drinking from, this well of information out there, and this is not just politicians, this is everybody. We have information coming in from so many different sources. Folks on your partnership as well have so many different ways, different areas which they're listening to, and trying to get that attention clear and understand, wait, what are we talking about here? Are kids in danger? Is it our kids? Is it those kids? How do we make it clear and get the attention? When we do turn in the media, talk about issues that's going on, we see a lot of faces yelling at us, talking about us. there is always an emergency, particularly as of recently. There's always an emergency, something news on this cycle. This is something from last year, but understanding that it doesn't stop. What we're drinking right there, the waters are really muddied, where we're getting our attention from. So the question is, how do you break through this clutter? How do you break through to policymakers, to key partners, to parents that are there to understand what's at stake, what they need to do? And that's what we're going to go through today. Spitfire just released a new tool. It's a free tool on our website, and I have more connections to resources at the end. Mindful messaging. And this is taking something we've done for a long time, which is strategic communications, in our message box and going up further. And what I mean by that, going up a little further, is we've come to a point where we see folks acting against their own self-interest. We see that people are marching out there for reasons they thought they knew. They're being activated by beliefs, whether it's against vaccines or against fluoride or against monuments that are out there, that there's a reason they're in the streets, they're holding up signs. And some of those times, it's not quite clear why they're doing it or if they understand. Again, it's looking at that water system there. And it is more and more difficult nowadays because a lot of the ways that we developed messaging is to assume that we're rational beings. And you know what? We throw in a story right there just to tug on the emotions. But we can give enough stats to say this is a problem and people will respond. But more and more behavioral science that we're seeing coming out is showing that actually we're not rational beings. We are an emotional beings that are out there. And this is something that as you message, as you do the work, not just internally, but externally, how are you going to connect with the folks that are out there? So at Spitfire, we've been trying to integrate a lot of these studies, understanding it, understand where people make quick shortcuts in their thinking, and how can we lean into that? How can we understand how brains work, how emotions work, and really utilize that for our messaging? So it's a circuit board that's up there. It is science. And as we develop more and more tools, it's hopefully these will help guide you to better messaging there. We thought it might be a straight shot like that circuit boards. It's actually a pinball machine inside of there. Messages bounce around. They're deflected by our lived experience. They might not even be let in if they're not aligned with our tribe. We might have a badge for one type of identity that conflicts with the way we truly feel internally. That's what we mean trying to go beyond demographics. So when you think of the audiences that you're working with and really trying to understand, we often defer to demographics. Okay, they live in this zip code. This is their education level. This is the income level that's there. Maybe this is what their asthma or their A1C rates. We're looking at health stats, we're looking at demographics, and we sort of apply our communications to that. But what we're seeing now more than ever is trying to understand them psychographically, really trying to understand the mental landscape by which they make decisions. What are their emotions keyed into? What do they believe right now? And how will your communications break through beyond the demographics? That's what's behind mindful messaging here. And so our tool helps you recognize their worldview, badges, tribes they belong to, whether the issue has a bit of polarization or a lot, what are the implicit beliefs and bias, trying to understand their lived experience and the habits that people have. These are the ways that the other layer we have above our current messaging box. So, going a little deeper, understanding the worldview. I'm going to talk briefly here about what we have for mindful messaging, and then I'm going to give you some actionable, sort of a checklist to look at your current messaging, and then we'll go into some examples that we work together with building building community resilience. So when we say worldview, how do people see the world in there? Understanding them, whether they're coming from a sense of fear or they're coming from a sense of security. Do they have a look at the world as it being abundant and continually giving, or is there a scarcity of resources? You can see how people's worldviews were changed if they've gone through a recession or the Great Depression. That profoundly influences how they see things, how they understand, and how you would message to them. Understanding someone's experience and coming from that, if they come from a world of abundance and they're talking to people who have a worldview of scarcity or fear, there's going to be a disconnect and messages can fall completely flat. That's from there. The badges and tribes that we belong to, that's how we publicly show up. These are the stickers that are on the back of people's cars. I believe sometimes those stick figures of families give away way too much demographic information for me, whether they're showing my family as zombies, Star Wars, or just stereotypical gender roles on there. For me, my generation, or how I share personal details, I'm not as much on badges. You won't find as many stickers on the back of my car. Other people do. Badges are how you show up publicly, what you identify yourself with. Are you a mad scientist, a rationalist? This is something that you want to understand when you're working with different populations. Being able to look at the badges that they display, the Facebook groups that they're in, what kind of stickers they might have on social media or within their community or in their front yard can tell you a lot. You want to make sure that you are aligned with their badges or speak to the values that are within their badges. Do note that this is how they publicly declare their interests. There might be some disconnect. This is maybe aspirational. And also tribes. What tribes do we belong to? Who do we hang out with? Who is in our close circle or in our larger circle that we feel comfortable? This is the people that we travel with. In understanding those tribes, you want to stay within those tribes and not create messaging that's counter to it or coming from someone outside of the tribe. As we talk about your messengers or spokespeople, it's really important to understand that they should come from within the tribe. And when I say tribe, we're seeing here an example of this when we're talking about environmental issues or climate change in rural communities. And having a politician or scientist, someone not from within the community or someone from Hollywood, talk about the issue, climate change issue, those messages are going to bounce off of the community because of their preset biases, because of their worldview. But if you have a local rancher, if you have a local business person, if you have someone from their faith or their church talking about climate change, this is something which there's already that trust. This is a part of their tribe that's there. So when you think about connecting with audiences, what tribes are they in? Are you the right one to be speaking to them? And understanding their lived experience, where they're coming from. Have they seen climate change occur? Turning it to adverse childhood experiences. Is this something that they have an ACE score and understand this or not. Understanding implicit bias as well. Looking at, for example, and this is something I've worked on for many, many years. When you say healthy food, there is that implicit bias that it's expensive. Cheap food is tasty. Are we talking kale? Are we not talking kale? Are we talking pizza? While we're seeing attitudes of these change over time, there is still that quiet implicit bias, which talks about what are our attitudes toward these issues and how people might respond. And so sometimes when talking about healthy food, you might want to switch it around and say local food. This comes from our community, homegrown food, because there might be a bias about health and promoting health. Another example to show how different we are looking at people's habits, understanding what they watch. And this is something that came from the Washington Post and had a really nice look at, thanks to Netflix and a lot of other streaming channels, we're able to see what shows are popular on television by geography. So you can see here in a lot of the urban areas, Adventure Time, Game of Thrones, Modern Family, Simpsons, all of these things are popular in urban areas. Understanding their watching habits understands how to message, how to connect with them. Shows that are very popular and most common in rural areas are Cake Boss, Dancing with the Stars, Deadliest Catch, Duck Dynasty. Really do a self-check and looking at how you're talking to people. Do you share the same habits as they do? Are you watching the same things? You might be promoting messaging or your spokespeople or even the channels in which you're reaching them based on your perception of where you're working. Some of you may not and are very tapped into the communities and understand the symbols, the messages, all the other elements to be in the same tribe, to share the same badges for that. So those are some examples there. So how do we talk to each other is a question that we try to get at through mindful messaging. And really sitting down and listening is the key aspect. Standing back and thinking that we're the target audience or this sounds right for us is a mistake you don't want to make. You want to avoid polarization and maybe not talk about issues that people feel completely on fire about. The Second Amendment, patriotism, any of these issues there. Parenting, that issue around nations, can be very polarizing, particularly if you're being critical of it. Finding ways to depersonalize things and help people to understand and get there to where the audience is, or help the audience understand where you're coming from helps. So here in Durham, they developed a sort of a simulation game to understand what it's like to be homeless, what it's like to live on a set budget, and ask people to go on to understand it, to try that, see how you could live. What are the choices that need to be made? And so when you look at a large number of people, it doesn't really ring true. But when you go through it or you talk about one person, then people can really identify. I wanted to share from that into 4 sins of messaging. And then I want to just bring up space here for any initial feedback, questions before I go into our activation point. At Spitfire, we do a lot in environmental areas. And one of the problems that we have is that many of the people who are talking are scientists. And what we see, what they think is most important does not necessarily align with the population. And so we feel with something like that, the only time we're going to use an acronym, and that's what we promise here, is MEGO, which is the sins of messaging my eyes glaze over. And if we're throwing out jargon, if we're throwing out stats, if we're not connected with our audience, the audience shuts down. There's nothing to connect them there. The other thing I bring up is public health syndrome. Public health syndrome is, and having worked, bless their hearts, with amazing public health folks at UNC and with Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, but specifically my team, sometimes they felt that they had to mention everything that was peer reviewed and, you know, had the research behind it. In doing so, we couldn't be as bold in our statements because it didn't pass the red face test. I'm not talking about shading the truth or changing things around. I'm talking about you don't have to cite everything per se in your basic messaging. That's there. This is something which is really key and allows you to edit it for more clarity. Everything is statistical overload. One statistic is enough, not 4 or 5 or even 2. And a lack of a narrative. If it's not tied into a story, if you have one story which highlights that one statistic, that is something which we feel is essential to getting smart strategic messaging out there. So hopefully you're not making those sins of messaging. Understanding the audience that's there, really trying to listen to where they are, and sitting down and taking a group of parents out for lunch, or providers, or other folks on the partnership to ask them what's important to them. Why are they involved in this? Do they understand what adverse childhood experiences are? You can train people up on your language, but if they are early child care providers or elementary school teachers, it's helpful to give them a rationale for maybe some behavior issues and make that link. But for others, you might want to stick to what's the most pressing problem where they are. The other thing that's key is understanding issues of class and culture, going beyond gender and religion. And one example that we have here recently in Washington, D.C., that the right to die law was really seen not as intended there, and seen from lived experience that this legislation reminded them of the Tuskegee experiments, that there's not necessarily a sense of trust on some issues, and going back and understanding different groups' experiences and engagement with the spokesperson, the messenger, or the overall message. I had an experience when I first moved here to Durham and tried to get 4 different neighborhoods together to support another neighborhood that was seeing a lot of gang violence. And as an organizer there, I said, let's bring in Duke University. They're right next door, and was immediately shut down. I did not know at that time that they were seen as a threat, that there was going to be gentrification in that neighborhood, that there was always that push. And so building our coalition, we had to exclude Duke, but I didn't know that. So that's something in listening and learning there. So I want to go back right here, and if there are any questions that you want to add briefly, examples or anything else, you can write them in right now. But I might just go to and get through the rest of the webinar because we have limited time here. Knowing where your audience is central. And if you're sharing knowledge with them, if you're building will, or if you're reinforcing action. And what's key is being able to, through mindful messaging, you have to understand their frame and then what you want them to do. So when it comes to ACEs there, do they know about it? Do they care? Do they believe? Everybody in your partnership does. But outside of that, you need to make sure that you're reflecting their values. You're respecting them in your communications. You're not labeling them, and you're speaking their language. For example, getting millennials involved in environmental issues. In one level, NRDC worked with brewers, craft brewers, to talk about clean water. And that is one way that the messaging worked there. Respecting the audience there and understanding how you talk to them. For Navy for Moms, they say in their messaging up front, you gave them the values, we give them the opportunity. So you are reflecting well on those audiences. And don't label people. Right here, this came to a colleague of mine saying, hey, you're a progressive, but your friends don't see it. Why can't they see the truth? You're automatically labeling them, put them in the box. Make sure your language, your messaging does not do that. That your messaging talks to them. And when you talk about payday loans, you're breaking it down what the costs are. Understanding if they care, making it personal is key. How do you make this, your messaging, relevant to them, their connection, their reward? Making this, you can see through Planned Parenthood, they're asking them for you to call your mom and make sure she's taken care of. So this is the personal connection in some of that. And do they believe? Do they trust you? Does the messenger have the same experience? This is a product that was created by a school teacher. There's no science behind Airborne, but it comes from a trusted source, a school teacher. Who are your messengers, and are they trusted as well? Going through, focusing on the one, talking about one child that you can help, as opposed to, we're talking all of Philadelphia's children. Bringing that one story of one person's example helps bring folks on board in many ways. It might even be about a dog. This is a wonderful story from Humans of New York. Now you want to build will. You've shared knowledge with them, and you have to understand that if you want people to act, to be on your partnership, to donate, to change policy, to go to a training, to sign up, that folks have barriers, and understanding the barriers where they are. How do you address those barriers? Our barrier busters are staying inside the comfort zone, make the benefit outweigh the risk, offer hope, make them the hero, make it doable, be the perceived social norm, show a leader doing it first, and consider their lifestyle when you message toward them. Hope is so essential. We know what adverse childhood experiences can do. We know about the pain. It comes from a world of pain. But talk about the buffers. Talk about the resiliency. Give people hope for what can be done, not that people are doomed because of what they've lived through. As you can see in the environmental movement, that it's been very difficult, and people can be very alarmist instead of offering hope there. Making people a hero for stepping up, particularly parents. Making it doable. We're not talking about system change overnight. Actually, we'd love it if it was system change overnight, but we do want to make it very doable. You can start by changing a light bulb that's there. That's one way to start saving. What are the requests of the actions you have to make it doable? Be the perceived social norm in the community, asking parents and make it understood that you can be this way. You don't want the social norm to be bad. What you say and what they hear in this ad looks like everybody drops out of school, and understanding that. Show a leader in your community who is doing maybe positive parenting there, who is doing trauma-informed care. Show a leader doing it first, a principal of a school, a city council member, a parent. And understand the lifestyle, where people are, what they like to do, where do they find joy. These are key things to keep in mind for your messaging. Get to know your audiences. Get a handle on what's on play with them, the challenges and opportunities. Assess and evolve your messaging. That's what our tools do, help you do, and I want to give you a couple examples to help you get a better picture. These are some examples of where you can get the information about different audiences, but the best way we feel is sitting down and talking to them. It's the cost of a lunch. It's a cost of time and listening and asking. So again, going back, your overall goals of your work. What do you want to do? Who's the audience that's there? The decision makers, healthcare systems, parents, local funders, the justice system, education, maybe the faith community, faith-based organizations. How do you need to message and work with them? So this comes from the work with building community resilience. And instead of just considering education as a partner there, working with the elementary school principal, the middle school counselor, the daycare director, how does their work and values align with ACEs? Understanding, is it alternatives to suspension? Is it learning capabilities? Understanding what their barriers are, what their interests are, helps you align your communications more effectively with them. Instead of faith-based groups there, connect with your local pastor, imam, youth minister, even the faith-based homeless shelter director. Understand how their work and values align with ACEs. What connects with the children's aspect of ACEs, or parents, or further down the lifespan as you're getting older? How might ACEs help them serve their congregation and connect with a larger network of trauma-informed support? So understanding where those connections are helps as we started building those. As a central part of Spitfire strategies, we use a message box. It's within our smart chart. And this is something that we did with South Dallas. And there was an issue of stray dogs. And working with the city council there, we helped them understand what the values of the city council were and the messaging underneath it. I'm just going to skim through this very briefly to show in the message box, we talk about the value, who's the partner is going to present there, what's the barriers they have, and the data to support the issue right there. This is how you build a messaging in that. What's the ask? Make sure the ask is very simple and something they can act upon. And then give them that vision. If they do that ask, what's going to come out as a result? You can throw in a story there too to make it very real. All of that communications work and those examples are within the Building Community Resilience Coalition Building and Communications Guide, available on their website. Building Community Resilience, and actually I do not have the website up here. I will make sure that that is in a follow-up. As you can see, they've got a description of the ACEs tree, the smart chart messaging box, and other tools, the Partner Build Grow Action Guide to help map assets, identify partners, and go through all of that. That's a really, really helpful, concrete examples that they're using in the communities there. Obviously, you have resources on the MARC website, the shared learning that's here. These webinars really help. And finally, to plug here through Spitfire Strategies, we have our smart chart. I shared examples of Activation Point, and we also have the mindful messaging tool on our website, and that's spitfirestrategies.com. The mindful messaging, the frames, let me go back, that we had that coming out of the Building Community Resilience work, sort of, and this is based on the frames from frameworks, talking about coming together for prosperity. Understanding that your community prospers when our children can succeed, because they are the future workforce leaders and community members. This is geared at city council members, at funders. Going further, the other frames there, empowered parenting works, empowered parents works, that families are at the center of this work, and understanding how it can be a positive way, not critical. And that resilience is an attribute at the individual and community level. That's in the restoration frame. And finally, that ACEs are an American problem. And this is something that comes from the environment and is done to the individual, not necessarily what the individual does to itself. Those are within the Building Community Resilience workbook. Those are some frames there for the messaging. The key is to tap into their values, overcome barriers, don't polarize the communities and the audiences which you're working with, share knowledge, build will with them, and ask them to be a part of a new vision. Create this together. The 3 takeaways: go deeper on psychographics, understand the biases, the thought processes, the beliefs, the values that are in play, and create messages that heed social science. They navigate challenges and make the most of the opportunities you're with. I'm available for questions now. I'm available for questions afterwards. You can send them to me. Like I said, we could talk for 3 hours on this, and I know we have so much more to talk about. Hopefully at the annual meeting in December, I'll be able to be there and talk even further, answer any additional questions that you have, or just brainstorm on this. The
Great.
Spitfire tools are free and on our website, so thank you.
Thank you, Mark. This is wonderful. And this is Claire again. We've used the Spitfire Smart Chart, so I can say that that's a very helpful tool. And I look forward to seeing more about mindful messaging and the new tools coming out of Spitfire. I am going to be posting the recording of this session up on the MARC website. We can be sure to circulate some additional links to Smart Spitfire tools to the folks on the phone. But if anyone has a quick question that they'd like to submit now, we can take 1 or 2 before we close. Again, we will have the recording available on the website, and we can send out links to the registered participants.
Hopefully all of your communications have been answered with that simple presentation. You know exactly what to say. One of the issues is people think they're magic words, and they ask the communication folks, give us the magic words, and we will, then we can change minds. And it's not about magic words, it's about listening to your audience's words, what they care about, where they're coming from, and what they aspire to in the future. In doing that, taking the time, whether it's funders, whether it's policymakers, whether it's parents in your community. If you don't know them, find people who do. Listen, ask questions, and respond the way they need to hear it.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing all these wonderful resources from Spitfire. I really appreciate your insight, especially through the Building Community Resilience Project, and I will get this session posted and those resources shared on the MARC website. So thank you everyone for joining us, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you all. Take care.